Hi, and welcome to Practical Ideas for Growth. I am Sarah Dobeck, and today I'm joined again by my colleague Ty Hendrickson. Welcome, Ty.
Thanks.
All right. I'm excited to be here. I always say this, but excited to be talking about this topic. We spend a lot of time talking about the sales training work that we do, but more importantly, what we hear back from the professionals that we're training all day long. And you spend most of your time in that space. And it's pretty common to hear that in some form or fashion, they're all afraid of the sales process, right? There's a huge fear around sales. But I think we spend a lot of time talking about, and what may surprise some of our listeners is that everyone selling has fears. Some of us have just learned how to overcome those fears and channel those fears a little bit more. But even some of the best rainmakers I know didn't start out not having a fear of selling, and still in some instances I know actually still have some fears around that. I'm excited to dig into that with you a little bit today and talk about it. I'm not sure all of our listeners understand though your background, and I think it's kind of relevant for the context. So can you start off with a little bit more about like your background in selling and perspective kind of coming to the table with this?
Yeah, so it is a very unique background. I started my career in public accounting. I actually am a CPA myself and realized very quickly that my personality was not the traditional accounting personality. And while I loved it, I met my husband in a firm, realized two of us couldn't work together, so I decided to jump ship. And obviously, the most reasonable place for a CPA to go right after they get their license is into selling. So I decided to make a complete 180 and went into software sales at CCH. And if you want to talk about being scared of selling, I've got lots of stories because I still remember my first day. I said, "What do I do?" They said, "Sell tax software." I said, "Okay, how?" What do you want me to do? And so that was, nothing like just being thrown in the deep end. And so it was really interesting, as I learned the sales process and as I learned how all this worked, I really just kind of fell in love with it and ended up going into sales training and sales leadership at a couple different software, companies in the accounting space, and then decided years ago that really just wanted to bring that back to the accounting world and help others kind of get that love for selling that I found.
Yeah, I love it. We have similar paths. So I just remember being recruited out of school, and oh man, I went to like a heavy B2C school for marketing, and they really sold the account manager, come be an account manager. I'm like, I just remember asking like, what do I get to do for that? Like, what's the job? And like, you get to make 200 phone calls a day. And I was like, I ran so far away from sales. I was like, I am never doing sales in my life. I went into a marketing role just so I could do marketing. Fast forward, 20 some odd plus years. I'm like, I'm obviously a rainmaker for our company and do sales and training with you. And so it's just really funny to see where we land, but we have this like perception. But I couldn't have been more afraid. The thought of cold calls terrified me. And I'm like, there's no way I want to do selling. Like it just sounds awful to me. And I think a lot of our accountants feel the same way. Like I feel a kinship to them when they like freeze up and you get that moment. But you talk with a lot of them, right? And so there's at all different levels, but like, what's the biggest question that you get around their fear of selling?
I think I think the big piece of this, right? The question is can I even do this? Right. And it's so funny because so many people we talk to, they're like, I went into accounting so I would never have to sell. Right. Like that's the whole reason I went into accounting. So I'd never have to sell. And it's like, surprise, now you have to. But it's it's really understanding what that process is and kind of getting down to the steps you have to take. I mean, that's what accountants are taught, right? We are taught to go through checklists and we're taught to think about everything and we're taught to tick and tie and we're taught to do everything with numbers and very analytical. And I'll tell you, I think that was like my biggest revelation when I got into selling was it's really all about numbers. Yes, there's efficiencies built in. Yes, there's all kinds of stuff, but there's specific steps you take. And there's, once you get those steps down, there's ways to improve it. And you kind of geek out over the numbers. And so when we hear from, individuals that are like, I cannot do this. I don't even, I don't know what to do. This is so scary. It's so big. You got to take it back to the fact that it's not this big scary animal. There are steps and there are processes, and you cannot go from, sitting there at your computer all day, every day, to being a rainmaker, bringing in $1 million a year overnight. That's not even like a 10-year thing, right? Like, it is a long process that people have to build up and set the foundation and, go through different activities. And so I think that's the most intimidating part about it. And that's why you hear so much, how can I even do this? I'll never be like Bob. I'll never be like Joe. How am I supposed to do that? Because they don't see the process that got them there. They just see the end result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I would agree with you. I think that taking the first step is the hardest. And I know that we watch a lot of these transformations in our programs. And so there's sort of this evolution that I think that I see, and I'm curious what you see as well. But once they get a little bit of support for training and they realize there's a process, right? We feel more comfortable with process, and they have a little bit of experience. Like, how does that fear change? Because I know my fears haven't gone around selling, have not gone away.
No, it changes. You get comfortable with one piece of it and then something else scares you, right? Because selling is unknown. It's not something that you can control. You can control the activities that you do that will lead to results, but you actually can't control if someone buys from you, right? And so I think that fear of the unknown, people vocalize it in so many different ways. I don't know how to do it. I don't know where my next client's coming from. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know if I'm getting the results, that I'm supposed to. And so it's that fear of unknown that always just kind of like rears its ugly head in different ways in different parts of the process, right? And so you may get to the point where you're doing all the right activities and you're getting, referrals in and you're getting clients in and you're like, man, this isn't as bad. And then you're like, okay, where's the next one? Okay, it's been like 2 months and I haven't had anything. Where's the next one, right? And so there's always just that kind of out of your control that you just have to learn to manage, right?
Absolutely. And I love that. I think we all, not all of us, but a lot of us don't like to be out of control, especially in any kind of service-based business. And those are some of the traits and characteristics that I think sometimes make you successful in these roles. And that can sometimes hurt, I think, in this process, especially when we think about doing something we never thought that we would do in some of that. I know there's ways that I've started to overcome my fears. Well, I'm one of those weird people that if I'm afraid of it, I tend to run at it. Usually it tells me it's something that I need to do within reason, of course. Just because I'm afraid to jump off the edge of a cliff doesn't mean I'm going to go do it. But I look at things as a challenge, right? If it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, I want to figure out how to get more comfortable in that. And there's always some things that foundationally, I think, can help you get more comfortable. What are some of those things that you see for accountants and what are foundational blocks they can use to help overcome some of these fears?
Yeah, I think the first thing is breaking down the process and giving yourself little milestones, right? If you've not ever networked, just getting yourself out there. One woman that we work with, she's amazing, but she's so funny. She just started this process like a year or so ago. She's got a huge circle now, but she goes, the one thing I would say to anybody is just go. Like, it doesn't happen if you don't go. And so some of it is just getting up the courage to do something or to talk to someone. And I think part of the other side of that is taking away the expectations and the pressure, because so many people feel like, okay, well, I'm going to go to this event, or I'm going to go talk to this person, or I'm going to go do this, and I need to come back with a client, or I need to come back with a prospect, or I need to come back with something. And that's not realistic. And that that's probably one of the biggest hindrances to seeing any of the success is taking a step back and saying, okay, what's the first thing I need to do? Put myself out there. Okay, well, what do I do after I put myself out there? Okay, well, what do I do after I've met someone? There's a lot of steps in the process, and really just taking bite-sized pieces of what you're comfortable with. And that's a big piece of how I coach personally. It's not a one size fits all. Selling isn't. And so one person may say, look, I'm ready to go out and speak. I'm ready to do all these things. I'm ready to write. I'm going on a radio show. Great. Let's do that. And let's talk about what we can do as a follow-up and how we're going to leverage that and what we're going to do with it. Someone else may say, I can't, I'm going to need somebody to go to this event with me, and I'm going to need someone to introduce me to everybody. And that's totally fine. Okay, well, what are you going to do to prepare for the event? What's a realistic expectation after? How are we going to leverage that? And so building up the confidence and taking some small wins, I think, is probably the biggest foundational piece that you have there. And the one other thing that I would say is, if you don't have a mentor, find one. Find somebody in your firm and ask them to go with you, or ask them to pick their brain, and just try to get yourself in a position where you can learn from others and build that comfort, because there's so much that you're going to learn, and they'll probably even tell you, learn from my mistakes. These are all the things I did the first 5 years that you don't need to do, right? And they're happy to share that. So, I think it's figuring out what works for you. But gosh, having a circle and having support and having a community, whether it's a mentor, peer, groups that are going through it with you, that's a huge part of this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One of my first bosses was so encouraging. I just remember sitting down, if we were talking about realistic expectations, right? What should we be getting? What are we getting out of this, right? It's not to come back with the lead. And I'll never forget, at one point, I was networking. I was really early in my career, and I was afraid to go to networking events. People look at me now and they're like, oh, you're so extroverted. I'm like, I'm not naturally built this way. Fortunately, I've somehow taught my children to be that way, but I'm not naturally built that way. And I had to learn. I remember showing up at the Chamber of Commerce events, not knowing a single person, in many cases being by myself, and just being afraid to walk up to a group of people that were standing there talking to each other. And I had to work up the courage to go in and insert myself into the conversation, which can feel super overwhelming, right? When you're going into one of those and you don't, and until you get comfortable, right? And so I just remember talking about that, and he sat down and told me, and he's like, look, we're never probably going to get business from this chamber right here. It's not our primary audience, but what you're doing is you're getting practice and you're building your confidence. And that stuck with me for a very long time, that I think it's important to have an entryway, because my ability, and I went to those meetings for months before I was truly comfortable. And that evolved into me doing a lot more in the business development space on behalf of my firm once I was comfortable. And I think too often we jump to the end, right? We want to see the lead come in. And I hear from partners all the time, well, what are they getting out of this? We haven't gotten a single lead. I'm like, they've only been doing it 6 months or 12 months. Let's focus on the activity. Let's focus on the follow-up. Let's focus on confidence building. And then down the road, we can look at where are they spending their time and what are they getting out of some of that.
I think that's such a big piece to this is taking that pressure off, like you said, right? Is what is realistic, because it could be a year, it could be 2 years before something comes in. And it's interesting. One of the biggest conversations we're having right now is there's so much pressure on younger, partners or managers, stuff like that, to bring in new business. But then also a lot of that self-imposed, truthfully. But then you hear from the leaders of the firm going, we don't want bad clients. We don't care if it takes 3 years. We'd rather you bring in one $50,000 client than, 10 $5,000 clients, right? And so there's this disconnect between the pressure that people are feeling to bring in new business and the strategy that firms are moving towards. But every leader that I talk to, they're like, no, they need to feel comfortable just practicing and building the right connections. And it's fine if they don't bring something in, right now, because I'd rather it be that good opportunity than a bunch of these bad ones that we're going to have to cull in 10 years. right?
Absolutely. And I generally find too that the ability to just talk about the firm is truly underrated. And it's not just an elevator speech, but the comfort of talking about different services, the time to learn about those services and know who to go to has become critically important because accountants aren't doing just tax and audit anymore. There is a lot that is changing. If you're watching the news this week, there is a lot that is changing and has been changing in this profession that's coming about. And so, even this whole process of selling, you've got to know so much more than you did before about all these other varied parts of the firm. And it takes time to build all of that.
Yeah, I think that is the first step in the process is you've got to know more than just what you do. You've got to know what your firm does, and you have to be able to articulate that. I mean, that is absolutely the foundation, and you don't know how to do that without practice. You can practice in the mirror. You can tell, your grandma as many times as you want, but it's not till, someone who's actually a good prospect's like, oh, what do you guys do? You're like, I don't remember.
Yeah. Fair enough. And it's a lot, but we were almost out of time, but I wanted to ask two more questions. The first is, what's one thing you wish someone had told you early in your career, in your selling journey?
Honest to God, that it's just a numbers game, right? Like I still remember when I started, they're like, okay, your quota is $1 million. Go sell $1 million of tax software. And I'm like, what? And so, when we broke it down of, okay, well, here's, your average, sales size. Here's, the average sales cycle, how long it takes to do it. Here's the average close rate. And so I'm like, okay, just back into this. I need to talk to X amount of people every month, and I need to move X amount of people to different stages. And then all of a sudden it was like, wow, this is easy. Never mind, right? It's not that easy, but it takes that out of controlness away from you. So if they would have just been like, okay, here's the numbers, do these things. Okay, I can do that.
Absolutely. Love it. I love that you turned it into a numbers game. Last thing is we have some really fun, exciting news to share about this very topic that we're talking about here. So I'm going to let you break it to our listening audience.
Yeah, this has just been something that I love talking about so much. And like you said, everybody kind of panics. And when people are new to this, they're going, oh my gosh, I'll never be Sarah. I'll just never be Sarah. I don't know what to do. And so I thought, you know what? I want to hear from people that, are successful and hear that they're real people, right? And I know everybody else does too, because when we go around saying, oh, it's rainbows and butterflies, everybody can be good at selling. Selling is really easy. You just, you can do it type of thing. They're like, nobody can relate to that, right? And so to get past that, we're actually launching a new special arm of our podcast called The Fears of Selling. And I've spent a little bit of time interviewing everyone from partners that are rainmakers in a firm to chief marketing officers, to people in charge of growth, to people that are new to selling, and just asking them, what was their fear? What is their fear? What were they scared of, and how did they get past it? Just so everyone can relate to it and know that it is not, while it is scary, it doesn't have to be this big thing that prevents you from doing it. Everyone faces the same fears. Everyone struggles, but it's something that, once you start to do it, you can really enjoy it and see great things from it.
That's awesome. Well, I know our listeners will be excited to hear more about that, and we'll have some information forthcoming on when we're going to be dropping that series.
Yes, it's coming after October 15th. Nobody's going to listen to us before then. So it will be here after October 15th with a bunch of interviews ready for you guys.
I mean, if you're listening to us now, give us a thumbs up just so we know, but I hear you. Awesome. Well, Ty, thank you so much. I love talking about this with you. And thank you to all of our listeners.
Thank you.